Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Allman and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Hey, pastor and church leader, do you ever feel stuck and you don't know the right next thing to do with discipleship, in multiplying disciples, in putting together structure and systems, but also not losing this organic need to maintain a culture of life-on-life discipleship centered in your big why? All of those things that I just threw out, if you're like, I don't even know what you said. I don't even know how that fits in our world here in our congregation. If you got questions, the Unite Leadership Collective is here for you. We invite you to join our next accelerator, and we will teach you, we will help you build over a whole year a leadership development culture centered on the structure, systems, and culture, centered in a big why that will release your found and baptized leaders for mission in the name of Jesus. Come and learn with us, uniteleadership.org. Looking forward to hanging out very, very soon.
Happy day. Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Allman here with Jack Caliberg. And today you are in for a treat. My good friend all the way back from college. We were just trying to remember, when did we start hanging out? Way back in college, Pastor Josh Duffy. And you're going to love this conversation today because Josh brings a wealth of knowledge and innovation, care for local leadership development. We have run in kind of parallel streams, Josh, trying to solve what is discipleship coupled with kind of an entrepreneurial mindset look like in a post-Christian age. And you and I just reconnected about 6 months ago, and we're going to have a great time today. So tell our listeners a little bit of your story, your ministry story there, Josh.
Yeah, number one, I bring a wealth of a lot of things, just not actual wealth. So I want your listeners to know that on the front end. There it is. No, actually, my story was I was in youth ministry at one of the largest Lutheran churches in the country, Salem Lutheran Church in Tomball, Texas. Served there 5 years, and then really felt led to go to the seminary. I felt like youth ministry was my compromise, and it was time to. And so I made the best decision you could make, in that I asked my beautiful wife, Mallory, if she would marry me. But 6 months later, we went ahead and moved to the seminary, had no money, no prospects, no future. So that wasn't stressful at all. So after much counseling and working on all of the fun things we got to discover about ourselves, and two sinners being trapped under the same roof, we took a call here to Pilgrim, which was actually the church where I was baptized, where I went to school as a child, where my parents were married. And really and truly, I was going to be a church planter. I had no interest in a traditional brick and mortar church. That wasn't going to be my focus. But this place tugged on my heartstrings, and they happened to be vacant. And so I went outside of what my little plan was.
So the church you grew up in was vacant?
That's right.
Pilgrim.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the irony is that the interim for 15 months was the senior pastor at Salem, who had since retired.
Wow.
So it all came full circle. So I've lived in both worlds. I've lived in the $10 million budget, and we spent staff meetings arguing about what we'd do with our money. And now I live in a world where it was bigger than my worshiping congregation now. And we argue about how are we going to get money. So I've lived in both ends, man. I've seen it all. On those. Yeah. I've lived that.
And how long you been at Pilgrim now? How long at Pilgrim?
7 years in July.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
and
man.
you started, tell us about Westcliff. There's a lot of convergence with what the Unite Leadership Collective is doing. And I love that you have been in a context that's a little bit more, like you say, brick and mortar. And yet at the very same time, a lot of freedom to try new things to reach lost people with the gospel. So tell us about Westcliff.
Yeah, I honestly, I had kind of this dream before I even went into the seminary of what would it look like to do church very differently. And then I just kind of abandoned it and gave up on it. Probably 2.5, 3 years ago, I was losing my mind in ministry. I really was. I was falling apart. I'd been through a lot here at this congregation. We changed the governance. We changed a lot of different things. We lost 50 to 100 people. I had already done 50 funerals in less than 4 years. It was just a ton of loss, and I was slowly breaking. So I went and saw a psychiatrist, a Christian psychiatrist, whose last name is Looney, no lie. And he was like, "Hey, so when's the last time you spent any time alone with God?" And I'm so embarrassed to admit, like, my honest answer was, well, I've been married for 10 years. So me and God, it hasn't happened in a while. And he was like, "What is wrong with you?" So he sent me to his house in West Cliff, Colorado. And he's like, "You need to take like 2 or 3 days, man, and really just think and pray about what does God want for your life and ask for healing and restoration." My wife couldn't have been more behind it. And so I went and I fasted and prayed for 2 straight days in West Cliff, Colorado. And then when I came back, I really felt led and reminded of this dream that I had before I ever went into the seminary of almost kind of this church without walls kind of thing. And so when I brought it back to go do that, pitched the ideas to my elders and directors, they were very, very cool about it. I mean, they were just supportive about how can we help you get this thing off the ground. They gave me the freedom to do it. And so basically, what I really wanted to see is what would be possible. I had questions that I wanted to answer that I didn't feel like I was ever getting to answer. One was like, is there any other way to do this? Is our only option to work 85 hours a week and destroy our families and our marriages and raise kids that grow up to be little drug dealers because they hate God and they hate the church because their old man was a pastor? Is there any other way to reach lost people, but also not just step on the face of an 85-year-old who just wants to hear one more song that they grew up with? I didn't know, like, is there any way to live in both worlds? Is there any way to see if there's any other way to do this? And so really what Westcliff really is kind of step one, which is, can you first put your resources, instead of putting your resources to plant a church in rental facilities and all the things that we traditionally do, which then most of my buddies that went into it, within 3 years, they burned through $250,000. They're exhausted. They're tired of putting up the tables and chairs. Nobody showed up. And then they ended up in a traditional church anyway. So I thought, hey, what if I take whatever money I have and I flip the script? So I'm going to put everything into my online presence first. And I can manage it easy. I can shoot videos and content once a week, if even. And in one day's work, I can put out 6 weeks worth of content. And I can see, is it possible to plant something or start something backwards? Because usually that's the last thing that comes is high quality content. Once a church has 3,000, 5,000 people, that's the route they go. Well, I was trying to do this pre-COVID, and I pitched it to some higher ups. I won't say any more than that. And they were like, we don't plan a church this way. And now I never circled back after COVID and go, are you sure? But yeah. I just thought, hey, let's just try to do this backwards. Let's just try some different things. Is there a different way to build a constituency? Is there a different way to pull people in? I spend a lot of time trying to get men, to sit in my pews. So don't go fishing, come sit in my pews and then hear about a group of guys fishing. Right? So yeah. Maybe there's just another way. Like, what's the goal? I just start asking those deeper questions. So a little bit of Westcliff is a journey in the making, like
Joshua, you said an interesting phrase, a church without walls. What does that look like for you?
Man, for me, it's there. I think you guys would relate to this. I think Tim would get this 110. Like, there's a point where no matter if you're on, I talked, very beginning, opened up one end of the spectrum or the other. I've lived in a lot of money, no money. And what I realized is lot of ministry is driven a lot of times by our assets that we have. If you build a giant building, you're expected that there is expectations that go around that. And I've lived that, you know, and you got to figure out a way to make that work. And that begins to drive mission. It begins to drive decisions that you make. And only probably the strongest leaders, I would assume Tim is probably one of them, can maybe buck that trend when they need to, or however they need to get ministry to be prioritized in the mission. And so when I think of a church without walls, what it's really kind of saying is, okay, like the first thing it's going to come is the mission of Christ, what he called us to do. And the first consideration cannot be our flood insurance, cannot be what do we have to put in this building to justify the fact that we ever built it to begin with. And I think what's happening is the culture and the world that we're around, they're actually on a trajectory moving further away from the church. I think we know that. And as churches are, in some churches, not all, are getting more and more desperate, their need to put people in it is being heightened, right? But the problem is the culture is needing to be met where they're at. So that may what the gathering looks like, and that may not work in a normal context, you know. And so that's really what I'm driving at. Yeah,
I was just kind of thinking about this. You know, churches are blessed in different ways with their facilities. There is this. We're going through a sermon series right now with Tim preaching. What is the church? Right?
Yeah,
it's not a building. Church has never been a building. It's the people, right?
Yeah.
So I think the better way always to think about the facilities is that it's an asset, and you can use that asset well, or it could be a curse on you. And if it doesn't serve you well, if it doesn't help you in your mission, then sell it or rent it out, right?
Yeah. Man, look, I mean, I'll tell you right now, we may have to sell some of our campus. We have to sell all of our campus. I mean, I'm living this statement right now. And I looked at some of our people. I just said this in church 2 weeks ago. I'm like, I get you love this place. You have beautiful memories. I'm like, I used to play out in that patch of grass when I was in second grade. I was baptized right over here. My parents made a promise forever right up here at this altar. Like I'm invested too, man. But my point was, and then I said, Jesus didn't come to die for your building. That's great. That's not why he's here. So you got to keep that all. And you know, it's been beautiful though. You know, when you hit people sometimes with that, I've had people now that have come up to me that I would have told you they will never get it, or like, man, you're so right, Pastor. Like, I've really been thinking about that, and my priorities are upside down. Praise God. You know, because I said, if you're willing to let go of those things, he may let you keep them. That's the irony. But he wants to be first. He doesn't want to be second to your organ or whatever, you know?
Yeah. We're going through, this is kind of a side note to your conversation, but we're going through this process right now where we're trying to put together a separate entity, and all it does is basically acquire real estate so that it could generate revenue. Like, you know, think of like a strip mall. It generates revenue. It pays off its own mortgage, and it could also be a church, or it could be a school, or, you know, so we're trying to rethink and just completely rethink the concept of how do we use property as an asset for ministry. And not that you put your identity in the property, but that the property serves this big grander vision that you have, and may even help to monetize that and fund it, right? So, I appreciate you sharing that.
We are of like mind, man. I'm literally writing a proposal right now with that. So I love it. I'm on your page, 110. Yeah.
So, Josh, you're unique, man. There are not many leaders within the wider church that have had the breadth of experience, big church, and then not only a smaller church, but you're a home church and kind of shaping culture of people that maybe babysat you growing up. You know, you're their pastor. So talk about quite literally. So talk about kind of the struggles, the benefits, and of being, you know, a prophet from his own hometown in changing culture right now, real time.
Well, I will say that text I've looked at 5 or 6 times now over the last 7 years, going, was he maybe talking to me? Like, and I wasn't paying attention, you know?
I don't know.
I will say that there was a group when we made changes earlier that were 5 to 7 years older than me, that they just walked, and they did know me for 30 years, and they wanted nothing to do with me after that. And I think some of those dynamics are very, very real. What's interesting is the people that were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s actually were the first to embrace me. What I discovered is there's something magical about the 5 to 7 year mark. And I think up to that point, a church that's been smoked like this one many times, they don't trust you. Their attitude is, they won't say it to your face, but you can tell that their attitude is, we're going to just wait you out. Because you're just going to leave like everybody else.
Right.
That's it. So we have our agenda. We know you're temporary. You have your little things that you want to do until you go on to bigger and better things. They're not expecting you to actually get in the foxhole and fight it out and fight for them. And so what I have discovered is about between year 5 and 7, all of a sudden I started learning about how messed up their families were or what their struggles really were. They finally started letting me in. And I think once that began to happen, that's when I won over the folks that I have at this point, that they realize, okay, no, this is legit. Oh, he is really trying to pour in us. So it's a big, relationship thing. And once I crossed over that threshold, it was just time, and loving them consistently, that finally I have, the cachet to make some moves.
That's excellent. And Westcliff is Westcliff is one of those moves. Yeah, it's beautiful. Go ahead, Jack.
The story that you're telling is the discipleship is more of a crock pot than it is a microwave, right? People hope that they can just kind of zap it and everything's corrected, but it's this deep relational process that requires building trust with people.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, you guys, I know that's a heavy emphasis, as it should be in our church body, and for you guys as well, of discipleship and really COVID, an odd blessing for me because I'm a solo pastor. So this gave me the opportunity to multiply myself. We have small group questions, interactive group. So I am the preacher, I am the drummer. Okay. And whatever other hats I need on Sunday. So I will play the drums, come out and preach, and go play the drums, and then come out and do whatever liturgy we're going to do, the traditional liturgy within that service. So we have a Bible class hour. That's me on a screen, a Westcliff video, and I have my best volunteer is walking people through those Q&A, and she just kind of keeps me in the loop on how are they going, how are people responding. And then I have my Bible studies, probably like you guys do, that I lead every Wednesday in my case, and I'm online. So to me, this online thing helps a church that's smaller. If they're willing to think differently and imagine differently, this COVID, as horrible as it's been, it's presented a lot of opportunities that if even smaller churches, it's not a resource thing, it's just a desire thing. If they'll leverage it well and leverage it right, you can reach people all over the globe. I mean, that's the beauty of it,
So are you?
So the way
hold on there,
go
Jack.
ahead, Tim. Sorry.
Yeah. I wanted to go into Westcliff a little bit more. So how do you steward and let's say pastor people through content? Because one of the things for me is we're producing a lot of content, not only in the ULC, but also as Christ Greenfield. One of the struggles is I know there are a lot of people there. I get data, folks that are watching our services or taking in content throughout the week and stuff. I know there are a lot of people there, but actually leading them to say, I am here and I not only am growing with you, but I want to multiply disciples with you and leverage your content. I think that gap for me, that's been one of the greatest question marks. It's not a frustration. It's just a question. There are many people there, and who amongst them, what percentage of them are going to say, here am I, send me to start new things in my respective location? We've got people watching us, just like you said, all over the country. They're watching you all over the country. Can we start micro sites, house churches, small groups to word and sacrament centers out of those? That's what I'm really looking for. I think there's going to be a tipping point where more people are going to say, "Here am I, send me." So yeah, talk about content and discipleship, Josh.
Yeah, I think that the content side of this is something that can enhance smaller gatherings of people. It can be a wonderful blessing to a congregation like ours, but I don't think it's the end game.
Nope.
Like I'm saying, for us, it enables us to multiply the one pastor that they have, and we use it to our benefit. But it's usually in the context of a group of people gathered around, praying with one another, engaging with one another, and diving deeply into God's word. So the content that we're making even right now is not the end game. And I think that's a key thing. I think we're all learning that in education, even in our schools, that we just thought we could put teachers online and it would all work out. And we're finding out students, we just don't learn as well in the long run if we're not face to face. And so I think you could take Westcliff videos. One of the things we're working on right now is an ability for home churches to have almost kind of drag and drop, like their kind of liturgy. Like they can take different Westcliff content and in a micro church environment, blast it up on their TV screen, their smart TV screen, but not by themselves. There's still to be together, to break bread together, to pray with one another. And then there's got to be a structure in place of discipleship and accountability and all of that. So yeah, I mean, I echo that, Tim. I don't think it's the end destination. It's not the catch-all for everything. It can help and it has its place, but it's not the point,
So somebody would need to step out in faith and be a leader of that. So to say, I want my house to be this place where people gather. I'll play the video. I'll run people through the questions. I'll make sure a meal's prepared, all that kind of stuff. What does it look like to invite people into serving in that type of role?
Oh man, I think I don't know exactly what you guys have going on in that world. I think when we've been at our best on that front, and I would say still for Pilgrim, our world pre-COVID, I think we were definitely getting there. We're having to rebuild certain parts of our culture and our world even since then. But I think it becomes a cultural thing. I think it's something that you have to pour into your people. You have to preach about it. You have to teach about it. You have to keep pushing them towards that. And then you have to model it. We did that within the context of our home, of what did it look like to just have a meal, have people together, not ask a whole bunch of creepy questions. Just what are you thankful for? Good friend of mine, Aaron Lytle here in town, like he would talk about how like that's one of the most spiritual questions.
That's right.
What are you thankful for? And that's a great opener. So I think that's there may be a way, but I think it's not in and of itself. I think that's a cultural thing and that's a relationship thing, and they got to work well together to make that happen. It's the right position that has the right heart and ready to jump in that capacity.
Yeah. Let's zoom up a little bit there, Josh. So we are, lifers in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, third generation here, and we have struggled, I think, to raise up entrepreneurial Josh Duffy type leaders within our church. Would you talk about some of your biggest concerns with how, there just are not a lot of entrepreneurial, creative leaders being discovered, deployed within the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, and what are some ideas that you would have to change that trajectory?
Well, I think number one, we're not a culture that encourages it. I mean, I hate to say this, but like Westcliff, I've had to do this on an island. I've only had a handful of people behind the scenes that like really get it. I think the problem is we're very institutional based. And so when things become about the institution, then it becomes about preserving the institution and protecting the institution. And the problem with entrepreneurial thinking is it inherently threatens at its worst and stretches at its best whatever is an institution. And so I think when a world is in self-preservation mode, they don't want that. They want the guy that'll come in, say what we tell you to say, do it the way we're telling you to do it, shut up and get in line. don't come along and potentially blow with whatever you think your ideas. So I think the first thing is there has to be that culture. The LCMS is kind of a world that eats its own. You won't hear many guys in our own world kind of pop, it's like whack-a-mole. I don't know if you've ever seen that game, like kids game, like at the arcades. It's if anybody's head comes up too high in our synod, we're unique that way. A lot of denominations, if someone is killing it and God is using them radically, and a lot of other denominations are like, hey,
they pour onto it.
Yeah, let's hear what that guy's got to say. Hey, why don't you write a book? Hey, we'll invite you to the next conference, But we don't, in our world, we're like, something must be wrong with him. He clearly has lost his doctrine and clearly he has compromised in some ways. That's just the way we seem to be wired.
Do you think there's a theological or at least say a perceived theological underpinning to that? Or do you think it's purely institutionalism?
I think our theology is beautiful.
That's what I'm saying.
And the dude and the man that kicked the whole thing off, you can't get bigger than him in the last 1,000 years. You know what I mean?
I know. To me, to use the word Lutheran is to embrace sort of disruptive means of spreading the gospel. And we saw that ethos, back in the day when you had the Lutheran Hour, right? And it was a big innovator in using technology, using media to get the message out.
Well,
what do you think? What would you say? I mean, Tim might have some insight into this too. What would you say? It seems like that was a culture shifting from innovation to institutional preservation. Is there something that triggered that?
Well, I think if you look at any movement, there's always the revolutionary who kicks down the wall and just using dynamite and shovels. That's it, and it's just a mess behind them. And then there's always the next person that comes along and their job is kind of clean it up. And then eventually the institutional people. And I think that's just what we're at is he came in, leveraging technology, pushing the boundaries, getting people connected directly to God's word and making sure that Christ was preeminent and the message of the gospel was what the whole thing was about. But as people then try to figure out how to systematize it, it's to the point that I don't know that Martin Luther, if you really read everything the man said, honestly, not just what we give kids in confirmation, if we read the totality of what the man said in different situations, the way he spoke to certain people at certain times, I don't know that he'd get into our own seminary. I don't think he'd get a call.
Right. The way that he viewed what faith does in a person, you should expect that person to be extremely bold and extremely courageous.
Correct.
And absolutely not allow institutions to get in the way of the gospel. In faith, you should, faith should be willing to suffer 1,000 deaths, right? If it's true faith, if you truly trust God's got this, there's literally no cause to be afraid of anything. And you kind of see that play out in the way he handled things, right?
110. He didn't just challenge. We have to remember this. Him challenging the Catholic Church was the equivalent of him challenging the Catholic Church and the government. Because they had that much influence, and he did it during the Black Plague.
Yep.
Their own pretty, right? That's pretty deadly, the Black Plague, right? So this is a dude that ministered through the whole way, leveraged technology, pushed the boundaries. That's our legacy. That's what we're about.
That's right, dude.
Yeah.
Hey,
so would we be willing to suffer 1,000 deaths for the sake of the gospel, right?
Right. Exactly.
That is our call right now. I was talking with a longtime pastor, Josh, just this past week, and he was listening to an interview we did with on American Reformation podcast with Matt Peoples. You know Matt Peoples, and Matt said something like, "We worship in the worship debate right now. We worship in style rather than worshiping Jesus." And this pastor, to your point, this pastor said, "Man, that for years," and he was honest enough, "but I have been afraid to say anything." And I wanted to.
on the one hand, you're like, I understand why you're afraid, but man, the perfect love of God casts out. There was something going on, and there's this culture, this ethos, this sociology that said, no, you, like a whack-a-mole, you stay down in your corner. That is not Jesus, man. So we are together, we are united on this mission to say, if the Holy Spirit puts something in me and around us right now that is going to have potentially the impact to reach people with the gospel, the free gift of grace by faith in Jesus, like I am disobedient if I keep my mouth shut. I'm thinking in the book of Acts, like we cannot help but speak about what we have seen and heard, you know? So talk a little bit more, Josh, about that lion's heart that's just needed within pastors. If you see something, if God puts something in your spirit, you cannot be silent. So yeah, what are your thoughts around that lion heart?
No, you absolutely have to. No, you absolutely have to, man. I mean, my church here at this point, they know that if something big hits culture, hits our world, that probably that following Sunday, I don't care what we're preaching on, we're gonna address it, whether it's social issues, cultural issues, and you know, I'm prepared for people to leave my church. I have emails in my inbox. I had one email where I got called. I literally had to ask my sister, because this happened like 5 or 6 years ago. Before it was like a term thrown out, I didn't even know what it meant. I'm gonna be real with you. Talked about a certain issue and handling it and what I just felt like was being a Christian. Okay, so I got an email telling me that I was woke. Okay, I had to call my sister. I was like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be woke? Well, then like I got emails later that called me a Nazi. So I've now just kind of stood up in front of my church and went, just listen, if you want to know what it looks like to like follow Jesus, he doesn't fit where you want him to fit cleanly. So, you know, this is what I've been called so far, a woke Nazi. Okay. And so we're going to walk through X, Y, or Z. And what we'll find is that if we preach these issues biblically, social, cultural, gender, sexuality, race in America, I find that people that are politicized on one end of it or the other get really uncomfortable. And then I consider that Lutheran missionaries. That's what I call them. That's just a transition letter to another church, you know? Yeah. And God bless you. But I want Pilgrim to be a place that encourages critical thought. I've had people come in the door that are atheists. They don't believe a word I'm saying. I'm not sure why they're there. They'd like the message, I guess, but we just, I want people to think deeply about their faith and apply it deeply. And I try to show the people at Pilgrim the hypocrisy of everything that's happening around them all the time and the contradictions that are happening around them all the time, because that's what people to do. I mean, in one sermon, he's like, hey, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit. And then he's like, hey, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. That's all in the same message, you know? So what is he doing? He's trying to get people to resolve all this tension in himself. You resolve it in yourself, you resolve it in this end of the spectrum or that end of the spectrum, you're going to you're not going to have peace. So, you know, that's what I'm trying to do faithfully from the pulpit. I'm trying to do that in different ways with Westcliff. But yeah, pastors have to speak and have to be willing to lose members who just want it their way. One of the unintended consequences, it's unintended consequence, wasn't the intention, to be clear. But you take something like the office of the keys, you know, like the preaching is of the church, the sacraments are the churches. And I think one of the weaknesses of the culture as a result is that our people, generally speaking, we don't add services or add a service based on growth. We add things based on preference because our people will tell us they want something. And that's good enough usually for the Lutheran culture. And instead, I challenged our people to go, listen, we don't have enough people for more than one service. We don't have a traditional and a contemporary service. And guess what? Newsflash, some of what we do in church, I don't even like. And I've said that. But I'm doing what I'm doing because I love you. And I'm doing what I'm doing because being together is what's the most important thing, young and old. And now it's to the point that my old people, they don't even want a traditional service anymore because they like seeing the young people and they're learning the new songs. I have people that I never thought would be good with just mixing us, but trying to help them understand there's a higher value system than just what you've grown up with, like being together, gathering together around God's word and around the sacraments. It's all very Lutheran things, it's not groundbreaking.
Yeah, no, this is good, Josh.
That's really good,
Jack
Josh.
Jack and I talk a fair amount about world issues and felt needs within the community, the church leaders, and just your every Sunday, worshiper. They want to know that the church is speaking into some of the cultural issues of the day, and and I've sensed this, not in a partisan way, in a very biblical way.
Right.
And I think we're primed to do that. So as you look at all of the different issues that are popping up in our polarized political culture, what are some of, I'll give you one or two concerns that you think the everyday not only hear the pastor speak about, but also wants to be able to speak about with great authority centered in the word in their workplace, in their community. Would you give me one or two of your top areas of societal concern that you're speaking about kind of consistently as a leader?
As in, go ahead and drop two nukes right now. Is that it?
Well, sure. Yeah. So I'll give you.
We're courageous here.
No, you're good.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I would say one that I've hit on a couple times is race relations in America. We have a very diverse church at Pilgrim, and I knew that the cultural pressure from the visual on this podcast is to just not talk about it or not address it, or if I do, kind of go a path that kind of doesn't create too much pushback or what have you. But really what I tried to push people to is a kind of a biblical tension of that particular issue as it's played itself out over several years now. One of the takes that I laid on our people that I thought was important is I said, listen, I can open up my Bible right now and I can show you where slavery, messes with people for generations. That's not a history book. That's not me diving into some other, documentary. That's me showing you in the Torah how messed up these people got and how they literally had to have God come down and say, I'm gonna give you a new heart and a new purpose. He had to do all of this because that's how much it messed with them generationally. Okay. And so that's one end of the spectrum, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, it's to say, but then God had a really clear design for his people: faith, family, education. Write this on your doorposts, put it on your kid's head and upon their heart. It was woven within everything within the educational system. So that's where I would walk in this tension where the more left-leaning people would go, oh, he's so right. Yes, it's generational. It is so true. That's what we've been saying all along, right? And they love that. And then when I say, but I won't support Black Lives Matter because they're undermining faith, family, and education, then they're irritated with me. But the concern because of my first statement. So then the whole church just by the end hates the sermon, and then they come back next week to see what happens. So that's one issue is race.
That's the beauty of our faith, though. It allows us to enter into what you could almost call them paradoxical conversations, right?
Exactly.
And Lutherans, really, if you understand the Lutheran theology, it allows us to do that probably better than anybody because it's the theology that embraces all of these paradoxes, the paradoxical nature of Christ, right? And all of these things. So how do you see that being a part of it? Because this is something Tim and I have talked about. I think this is a time in history that's almost custom made for Lutheran theologians to be able to speak into what's going on into society.
Yes. I'll give you another good example. Was on my street are two of the most powerful fundraisers for the LGBTQ community here in Houston.
Wow.
These two guys are heavy hitters in Houston, and they live on our street. It's a crazy story. Harvey, we flooded. We had to evacuate in the middle of the hurricane. But before we evacuated, water's coming in our house and we didn't know where to go, man. Like 911, I called it. It's the only time in my life I got a dial tone from 911. And I'm like, we are done. There's water coming in. There's nowhere to go. We had just moved to where we were at. I can't even see across the street. It's bad news, middle of the hurricane. All of a sudden, there's a man standing in the doorway. He looks at me and goes, and by the way, he had a pair of white rubber boots on. I didn't even know they made boots white, rubber boots. So I'm like, huh. Anyway, he's like, hey, you guys need some help. And I'm like, yep. So he helps move my whole family to high ground, okay? Well, it only took me about 20 minutes to realize as his husband comes across the street that I'm like, oh, okay. Like these two are together, right? They're moving in their stuff. Their whole house got destroyed. And I had to lay low for like 30 hours with all these people on my street I didn't even know. And they were going off about Joel Osteen. There was a whole thing that happened at that time. And I'm like, Mallory, I don't need anybody to know I'm a pastor right now. Like we got to just like get through the next 30 hours and share this house with all these people. So there it is. So the water finally subsides. I get my family to the other side of Houston and I go up to him. His name's Kim. I'm like, hey, Kim, I'll pass this Donald Trump pinata to get to him. Like him and I could not be more different being this guy. So I go, hey, Kim, I have a confession. And he's on the phone with his husband. I said, I'm coming out. I'm a pastor. So this guy's like, what? And so what I did is his house was ruined. I sent him 6 cheap beer drinking, Donald Trump voting rednecks. And they helped that guy more in 6 hours than he would have gotten done in 6 weeks. And what ended up happening was a relationship was formed from that. And eventually, back to the paradox, and this is where I'm going with the story, is I eventually sat down with him because we'd meet for coffee, on like regular. And, he was a guy that was baptized as a kid. He grew up. I was actually Lutheran. I think it was in the Netherlands. Like he had that history, but he's long since moved away from it. And I finally just sat down with him. I said, listen, man, I'm going to say a couple of statements that I apologize in advance, but I won't be able to resolve for you. And they're going to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. This is that Lutheran theology thing, Mm-hmm. I said, but I'm not. I said, and it's sincere. I said, as you get to know me and I get to know you, I understand something. I could never biblically make work doing a gay wedding. Can't do it. I'm like, what I would have to do biblically, what I would have to gut out of scripture to make that work. I said I could no more hold a man accountable for running off with his. I'm like, I can't do it. I said, but at the exact same time, I need you to understand something. Jesus deeply loves you.
Amen.
Jesus completely loves you. Jesus loves you right where you're at. I'm not talking about he only loves you if you pray the gay away, and you will always be welcome at my church. I would love to have you at my church and just walked him through. I'm like, listen, if you had a kid, you guys adopted a kid, I'd baptize your child. I just have certain lines. I go, I know that doesn't make sense. Like, why am I drawing a line here? And I said, I hope you can understand or maybe not understand. And my point is ultimately, Jack, like in this is that what I found was actually greater respect between both of us is what came out of it because there's clarity. The whole world is confusing. So to have someone who just puts it out there, like there's this and there's this, and regardless of what the world says to you, these two ideas that you're told can't live side by side, they actually can. And it's kind of just the countercultural, like, you know what? Culture says that either to be this way or be that way. Well, no, if we're uniquely us to our theology, we don't have to cave to what culture says. It's always trying to put us in one camp or the other. I'm going to be in a third camp, which is what I said to him, and I think he found it refreshing and it, we have a friendship to this day. So that's my combo. my two nukes to answer your question, what I preach and talk about, along with Lutheran theology. There it is.
Excellent. That's fantastic.
Man, Jack, that was a lot of fun to listen to that amazing story. And that's what we really seek to at the ULC and as pastors and leaders in the church, is to embrace that third way. It feels strange to the culture to say one thing that is kind of against me and for me at the very same time. And I guess as just a human being, that's just, I am against certain parts of myself, right? There is a part of me that doesn't like certain parts of me. And yet Jesus loves and died for, rose again for all of me. So it's neat to have a brother in Josh that's engaging that kind of third way. Blessings to him and his ministry at Pilgrim. And what are some of your thoughts as you listen to that story, Jack?
Oh, well, I think this is the beauty of it. Like when we think about God's mission, his mission on earth and his mission through the church is to bring people to belief. Mm-hmm. And we at many churches confuse the idea that the purpose is to bring people into ethics, right? Mm-hmm. Ethics is something that can come later from faith, right? So you have permission to have conversations that have a different set of ethics that you would normally have. And then through faith, invite that person to say, does God speak the truth on different issues, right? Yeah. If a person doesn't believe that God speaks the truth, there's no purpose on battering somebody on the head because of their ethical behavior that you disagree with them about. Yeah. Right?
That's right.
So I think this is the key, right? Jesus, the thing that was unique about Jesus's ministry, he hung out with adulterers, tax collectors, right? Everybody that was Gentiles, people that were cast aside from society, including people that were going against his own plan for marriage, right? The woman at the well. He had no problem engaging in these loving and challenging conversations with these people because ultimately his goal was, I want these people to believe.
Yeah. If we move and lead with only the law rather than love and charity, we will end up being God and placing our laws above God. Now follow me on this logic, Jack. We get to, as followers of Jesus, embrace the fact that I have more in common with the adulterer, the Gentile, the tax collector, the prostitute than I do with a holy other God. I've said that in numerous contexts, and that kind of cocks my head. Like, I think there's this prideful desire in every human being to be right. No, Jesus didn't come to prove that we as human beings are right. He came to make us righteous by his perfection.
By his work.
Mm-hmm. His perfectly fulfilling the law, his death, and his resurrection. And so we should lead with a lot more love and charity and kindness and compassion and speak the truth when we do with those who acknowledge where truth comes from, God and his word. We must embrace. Now, out of that, and I love his story, out of that, I can't do a gay wedding. That's just something that conscience and scripture does not allow me to do. But I can be your friend. Right. I can be your neighbor.
Because he's affirming he believes that God speaks the truth on this matter.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So it's not about quote unquote being right? The righteousness is done in Christ. Amen. Right? It's really a matter of like, this is how I believe, and so I have to be consistent with how I believe.
Amen. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for being with us today, Lead Time listener. It is a good day. Go and make it a great day. Sharing is caring. Wherever you are listening to us, would you rate us either on Spotify, YouTube, iTunes? It helps us get the word out about Lead Time, where we are truly trying to set up conversations with people who view the world maybe with Jesus as being the main lens, but maybe in their context, they're going to articulate things slightly different than we would. And different is good. Different is going to bring us, honestly, closer to that third way, closer to the heart of Jesus. So thanks for joining us today on Lead Time. Jack, as always, you do a wonderful job, and we will see you next week, listener. Peace to the Lord.
Thanks, brother.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening and stay tuned for next week's episode.